Welcome back. In today's video, we will discuss how to select objects and the three basic actions that can be performed on an object. Since this video will be a little more interactive, where you'll be doing a lot of the things that I show on the screen, I recommend watching through it once, just so you have a general overview of what's going to happen, then going back and watching it a second time, pausing the video and doing each step kind of as we go through that. So, before changes can be made to an object, Blender needs to know which objects you want to change. In most programs, this is obviously called selecting. Our scene has three objects. In the center, we have the cube. To the upper right, we have the light. And here on the left, this pyramid-shaped thing with a triangle is our camera. Now, if you want to select something, we'll be using the left mouse button, as with most computer programs. And in the notes, I will abbreviate this LMB. So if you left click on the cube, you can see that it was already selected. And also, if you haven't started with a new Blender file, I would recommend doing that so everything looks the same. Now we can select the camera by using the left mouse button, and you can see that it changes color. It'll either change color or you'll have an outline depending on the type of object, and I just selected the light. Sometimes you need to select more than one object, and to do that, let's start by selecting the camera. We will hold down the Shift key and then select the cube. Now both objects are selected. So by holding down the Shift key, you're adding new things to the group of things that have already been selected. So I could hold down Shift and then add the light. I can left click in an empty spot and everything is unselected. There's another way to select, which is called box selection. So if you left click and drag your mouse, you will create this box. Then everything inside of that box will be selected. Now that we have a basic understanding of how to select objects, let's go ahead and talk about how to make changes to them. There are three basic actions that we can do to an object. Those are moving, rotating, and scaling. So first we will discuss moving an object, and that means that we change its location in 3D space. So we're changing its X, Y, and Z location. So let's select the cube. And Blender provides some different ways to do the same action for many things. And I will show you each of those, and then I'll kind of explain which ones I think are better or more effective. So let's discuss the three ways that we can move an object in Blender. First, we can use what's called the Move widget. So if you will focus here on the left, you'll see this little row of buttons. This is called the toolbar. And if you hover your mouse here on the edge of this, there we go, and left click and drag, you can expand that so that you can see the name of each of those tools. The default button or widget that's selected is the select action. And if we left click and hold our mouse down, you can see there are some different options, but typically I'll leave this on select box. One common problem that I see a lot of students have, they'll accidentally click this second one that says cursor, and every time you left click, that little circle just moves around. Nothing is selected, and that becomes very frustrating. So if you ever notice that happening, make sure that this box is selected and your life will be a little less chaotic. So we're going to look for this icon. First, let me select the cube again. The move icon, it looks like four little arrows. And you'll notice that our cube now has three arrows and three little flat planes. So if we pick one of those arrows, left click and hold down our mouse button, we can now drag our cube on the Y-axis if we pick the green one. If I pick the red one, the X, we go on the X-axis. If I pick blue, the Z-axis, we go up and down on the Z-axis. One thing that I don't have in the notes is you see these three small planes or flat squares. If you click on the green one, your object doesn't move on the green Z-axis. So it kind of locks it on the X and the Z, so it stays on those two. If you do the blue one, then it does not go up and down. It only goes left, right, forwards, and backwards on the X and the Y axis. If you click, excuse me, in the middle of this little white circle, left click and hold down, you can freely move it on your screen just randomly wherever your mouse goes. As I said, these buttons, students may accidentally click one because they stay on. It doesn't switch back to anything until you do that manually. So let's go ahead and switch this back to the select box. Now, a second way to move objects is by changing the X, Y, and Z location by typing in a number. To do that, we'll be using the Properties shelf. And to open the Properties shelf, we click on this little arrow here in the top right of the 3D viewport, or you can press the letter N on your keyboard. N is in new, and that will open and close that panel for you. So here we can change location values, rotation values, scale values, and dimensions. Now, these are related, and we'll get into that more in a future lesson. So let's take, let's take the location values, click on each one, type in 0, and that will move our cube. Make sure your cube is selected. That will move our cube back to the center. Now, if we change, the X value to 5, that will move our cube 5 units on the X axis. The third way to move an object is to use keyboard shortcuts. A keyboard shortcut is when a button on your keyboard will perform a specific action. And we've used a few already in some of the activities. So with the cube selected, we're going to press G, and G, think of that as G for grabbing. And then we can move our cube around our scene. And our cube moves with the mouse. If we press the left mouse button or enter, Blender will place the cube in that spot. If we press the letter G and then the letter Y, our cube is locked onto the Y axis, and then by left clicking, we can place that. Last, if we press G, the letter Z, and then the number 2, and then you can left click or press enter, Blender will move our cube up 2 units on the Z axis and place it there. My personal preference is to use keyboard shortcuts. They're a little harder at the beginning, but once you get used to it, it's much quicker, in my personal opinion. If I need to make something or put something in a very precise location, I typically type the numbers in. And to be honest, I very rarely use the widgets. I find it rather time consuming every time I need to move or do something simple to move my mouse over, click, move it, go back and forth, back and forth. It just seems a lot harder and takes a lot of time. Next, we will talk about rotating. Rotating is when we change or spin the way the object is positioned on an axis. So to start with, I'm going to move my cube back to the center by typing in 0 for the location. Now to rotate this, we can use the widget. So if you click on your widget tool, you can see you have some different circles that you can left click and drag those to change the rotation of the object. And I will turn that back, switch that back to the select box. We can type in values into the property shelf. So I will change the rotation of our cube, make sure it's selected, back to 0 for X, 0 for Y, 0 for Z, and now our cube is back to its original rotation. And we can use shortcuts, and the shortcut for rotation is R. So let's practice that. So if we press R, then X, 45, and enter, we can now rotate that 45 degrees on the X axis, and you can see that number showing up in the properties panel. And last, we'll talk about scaling. So let me change this back to 0. So scaling is when you change the size of an object overall or in relation to one of the three directions, the X, Y, or Z. So as with the other two, the three ways we can do this are, 1, use the scale widget. So I click on that, and then I can either click in this center white circle and drag, and it changes the overall size. I can click on the end of these little handles and scale it or stretch it on these different axes, and we can change the value in the property shelf by coming to scale. Now we don't want to type in 0 because that means it is 0% of its original size. We want it to be the original size, which would be 1% or 1 in this. Blender uses numbers sometimes in percentage. I'll explain that later, don't worry. And last, we can use the keyboard shortcut. So let me turn off the scale and switch it back to select box. That's why I never use that. I always forget to turn it off. So to scale is the letter S. So if we press S, we can scale our cube to different sizes, and left click once you are happy with the size of your object, and press enter when you're happy with that size. You can also hit S to scale, pick an axis like Y, and then a number, for example 5, and press enter, and then Blender will scale that along that axis to stretch it out. And you can see those numbers are changing over here. So let's review. Objects can be selected by using the left mouse button. For example, left clicking. If you hold down Shift and then select something new, all those things are added to your selection. You can left click and drag to do box select. So if I click here in an empty area, it unselects, and then I can box select to select those objects. Objects can also be moved, rotated, or scaled. So in our next video, we'll do our first animation where we will make a simple video of a word spinning as the camera moves into that. We'll also animate the lights, so some of them move, some of them dim near the end of the video. So we'll learn a lot of cool things in this next video. And it will allow us to practice our moving, our rotating, and scaling. And it will introduce several aspects of animation to get you exposed to that process. So thanks for watching, and check out the next video.